Well, hello everybody. Welcome into Great Atmosphere here on this Thursday of January 18th, 2024. Just want to get started by looking at the world today. This is our current world temperature anomaly map. Now, this is largely inspired by a good amount of folks who, for one reason or another, they see that it's cold outside in the Midwest and other parts of the North American continent. And they say, hey, this is a pretty cold winter. Where's global warming? Now, if you don't know, the world has essentially set a new global heat record year over year for the past at least 5, 6, 7, 8 years. 2023, of course, was the hottest year on record, as it were. So unfortunately, that is currently the situation we're looking at. But all the time, people kind of get distracted by saying, "Hey, if it's not specifically burning hot outside of my bedroom window, that means that global warming is a myth." And just wanted to get started by showing that while there is some blue here in the North American subcontinent and Alaska, and particularly Greenland, the rest of the world is largely orange and red. You can see Siberia, and this is the data 0 to 10. So this is what the Euro is expecting here in the next 10 days in terms of averages. We're expecting much higher than normal temperatures over the course of all of Siberia, the Sahara, and the Middle East, hotter than normal, the majority of northern South America, and pretty much only, and of course in the northern hemisphere, it's currently experiencing winter, so winters have obviously a little bit more opportunity to be warmer than usual. But in the southern hemisphere, it is summer, and in the regions that are particularly blue down in here, near Mozambique and Zimbabwe, Botswana, into Uruguay and northern Argentinian regions, and the northern regions of Western Australia, those are regions that are currently experiencing some form of tropical system, so they have a little bit of a cloud deck over them, but largely it is a warmer than normal summer, with I know parts of Australia experiencing well over 50 degrees above normal in some respects, or they're saying 50 degrees Celsius, which is setting some certain records in that particular region, along with some big records being set in the Andes of Chile. So certainly a warm start to 2024, not much of a surprise, except for us here in the North American subcontinent, as we continue to cycle in this Greenland Arctic air due to our sudden stratospheric warming event that disrupted the polar vortex. And we can see this as, as a good example of just showing that, the world is constantly moving. The whole of the atmosphere is ultimately trying to achieve both hydrostatic and geostrophic balance throughout the course. So it wants to have straight horizontal winds, and it wants all of the dry, cold air to be at the poles, and it wants all the warm, moist air to be at the equator. And essentially all that weather is just the planet's way of trying to balance itself out and try to achieve this otherwise impossible dream that it's trying to achieve, that you see other planets in the solar system, namely most of our gas giants, and some would argue Venus, have actually succeeded in to their detriment. So just kind of a beautiful and and not particularly great looking snapshot there of the Arctic. Quite a bit of red as we go forward in time, that I would generally like to see in the Arctic, but that is neither here nor there. So let's get started. Looking at our current temperatures, we have actually mild conditions here in the southeast, mid 40s, lower 50s throughout the course from Mississippi all the way up into central Virginia and into as far south as the Jacksonville region before you hit that subtropical jet, and southern central Florida. But you see our Canadian prairie is starting to get loaded again. This is the middle of the day, and most of Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba experiencing barely, if not, just not even getting above zero today. These are their maximum temperatures, and you'll see over time that this will start to shift our way further to the southeast. So we can take a look at that right now, actually, using the NAM. Now, the primary reason why we're actually so mild today is that we have a weak high pressure system Excuse me, as I get around Pivotal's Pivotal's great website design. We have actually a weak high pressure system that's sitting off of the Carolina coast, and that is ultimately working to advect just before the system starts to make its way down some warm Gulf air, just periodically and sporadically up and into the southern tier, and that's ultimately what's bringing and keeping our temperatures a little bit more elevated today, and giving us a slight reprieve from the cold before it really starts to set in tomorrow and Saturday. So if we go forward in time, we can actually see what that particularly is going to look like, and it's quite pretty on this map, but man, it is going to hurt. So you see here, this is the middle of the night Thursday, starts to really reach down into the central plains. We'll heat up relatively. This is middle of the day Friday, barely. This is in central Missouri, Kansas City. That'll be, what is that? That's around 10 degrees. Chicago, right on the lake, will be around 0. And the Appalachian Mountains are going to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of blocking the coastal plain and Piedmonts of South North Carolina and Virginia, and a little bit of Georgia. But ultimately, that's going to get overrun in the next couple as we go into Friday night. Whoosh. And the whole of the southeast is plunged into below freezing temperatures. We actually get into the teens, and the mountains will get into the tens, or near in the single digits, and some even below that. And as we can see in Iowa and the Dakotas and Minnesota, they're well below 0 as we go forward into time. Definitely Saturday night seems to be the problem area that we'll see as we look ahead into the plumes. But even Friday night should be the worst of the worst for the Midwest and the central and the north central plains. And we can see this temperature anomaly as it looks forward. This is currently what we're looking at. It's about 10 to around 15 degrees below normal across the entire eastern half of the contiguous U.S. And we can see that temperature loading up in the Canadian prairie. But generally speaking, the west and most of Mexico is warmer than normal. They're enjoying a Pacific jet that is making its way through, and it's southern oriented due to there being a significant high pressure system that's over the Bering Strait, pushing down a lot of that moisture and temperature advection, and it's getting quite a bit of both warm temperature advection, I'll say, into the western parts of the country. I just want to take a look first at some of the record-breaking temperatures that we've seen here over the past 7 days. Anything that you see denoted in blue is challenged a all-time record, and some of them that you could see in black and even darker blues have broken the record. So we certainly have gotten quite a bit of cold air here, and I think you can definitely expect this, and you can see it already starting to set up right over here as we move forward into our weekend. But it won't last forever. As you can see, this is just the 5 to 10 day outlook. So by the end of 10 days, this is what the Euro is expecting in terms of temperature anomaly. The warm air will return for the most part. And this is all relatively warm air, mind you. But we got here in the Piedmont and North Carolina and Virginia, they're expecting well over 18, 20 degrees above normal in some respects. We'll see if that actually pans out. But I do expect next week to be probably in the mid-50s, definitely the mid-50s up to the mid-60s, which will be quite a clear departure, over 50 degrees of a difference for some respects in the North Carolina, South Carolina region. And we can take a look at the trusty plumes real quick. This is take a look at their expected temperature profiles over the next couple of days. As you know, the plumes are a way to depict confidence in forecasts, and this is done by the National Weather Service Storm Prediction Center. And you can do a variety of parameters all throughout this, and you can also choose which locality you would like to look at by using these plumes. So right now we're honed in on Charlotte as we go forward into the evening. Not expected to get under freezing tonight, but we'll stay about the same tomorrow in terms of high temperature, and then we'll start to make our gradual decline by the coldest part of the day on Friday morning, or Saturday morning, sorry. It'll be 25, and that does not account for wind chill, so you got to keep that in mind as well. because we can look at wind here in a second, I believe, as well. Yeah, we'll take a look at that. And then look at this, down in the teens here in Charlotte. And taking a look at our winds, they're going to be elevated, sustained, 15 miles an hour, averaging out to 10. So wind chills are going to be ridiculous in this. It'll probably definitely get down to the single digits, especially as we get down here into Saturday. Oh, I'm sorry, into Saturday from this point of view. But we can look around to other parts of the southeastern tier. Got to get way down there in Roanoke. We're looking at 15s. It's just our temperatures, not accounting for wind chill. Raleigh on Saturday night will be about 20 degrees. Closer you get to the Gulf Stream and the ocean, obviously, it's going to be a little bit warmer. We can see that through Wilmington. This is also to scale, so even though it looks like the same line. This is it's different scale, so you can see the freezing layers a little bit higher here, but definitely even at the beach it's going to be 25 degrees at its coldest. Certainly a dangerous combination for people that are not necessarily used to this kind of cold. We'll take a look at our National All Hazards Index, and you can see as that cold starts to set in, we have our wind chill advisories starting to make their way back down into the majority of Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, and then our big winter storm system that we're expecting over the next 48 hours will start to impact the Ohio River Valley in the Midwest, along with the Mid-Atlantic states going forward into the next 48. Still have some light snow by comparison to what they've been experiencing earlier with all their blizzards and ice. Some of the most devastating ice I've seen in a long time have happened along the I-5 corridor in Oregon. Certainly, and not a lot of people obviously are talking about that because of such other extremes that are happening throughout the country, but Oregon is certainly experiencing quite a bit of severe icing as we go forward. Still having some river flooding issues as the storm from last week is it's starting to drain away from the overloaded reservoirs and whatnot. I know some friends of mine that live in that area are still having higher elevated river totals near them, and they're wondering why. Well, it's because the reservoirs that are feeding those rivers are slowly letting out some of their water that they've had in excess, but they can't do it all at once, so they're just kind of stuck in this minor flooding stage, hoping that not any more precipitation comes so the rivers can truly recover. Taking a look at what we're going to be looking at radar-wise, at least through the eyes of the 3K NAM. As we move forward here, this is Thursday afternoon. Has some thoughts about some icing in northwestern Tennessee and central Kentucky, and that first big plume of lake effect-esque snow starts to make its way all the way through the Midwest, and we get our full crux of snowfall that's going to be occurring over the mid-Atlantic states here in the next couple. You can see not a lot in the ways of precip. The mountains kind of block whatever kind of upslope precipitation that would otherwise be making its way into the Carolinas. It's just this one little precipitation streak shouldn't offer more than a 30-40% chance of some light rain as it goes forward. And then we'll go, and as the system makes its way out, it'll start to open itself up, and high pressure will start to set in, and we'll be in the crux of the cold air as it moves as we get into our weekend. And this is interesting. I know the big story in the next 36 will definitely be this big winter storm, and over the West Virginia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland, D.C. A lot of people are wondering where that rain's. It's not necessarily a rain-snow line. They're obviously pretty confident that it's going to be all snow for that particular region, but mainly it's going to be how much snow. So every day, multiple times a day, the National Weather Service at your local National Weather Service office, this is for every single one, will put out this very in-depth forecasters discussion, which ultimately discusses in various zones throughout its own its own area that it's responsible for, why it's thinking the way that it's thinking. Now, it is true that this is a highly technical analysis, and the layperson is not generally going to understand. But this is essentially what good forecasters and good communicators ultimately do. So they essentially will take the forecasting discussion from the upper level PhD level meteorologists, and then they will discern some of that criteria that they've described in these discussions and put it into their communications as simply and as plainly as they can for the public to be able to consume. This is what essentially a good broadcast meteorologist would be able to do. So we're just going to take a look real quick at what the Mount Holly team up near, I think this is the team responsible for New Jersey and Philadelphia and that general region up in the eastern parts of PA, what they're thinking. So they're saying an initial coastal low will develop off the Carolina coast Thursday night, track northeastward from off Cape Hatteras Friday morning, initiated by a weak-lead shortwave trough. However, little typos every now and again. A much stronger shortwave and vorticity max will head quickly eastward from the Ohio Valley toward the mid-Atlantic coast on Friday, while partially phasing with the cold upper low dropping off in the Great Lakes. So what are they talking about there? So essentially they are discussing low tracks. So they're saying that this is the primary low that is in question, and the low is part of a positively tilted trough. So the trough axis kind of goes like this, and then it has the coastal low, which is very common as warm air kind of moves up or cold air starts to meet the cold or the warmer Atlantic. It'll start to spin as the cyclonic vorticity as the air starts to rise, and the cold air sinks as it meets the ocean, and it'll start making its way up the coast. This is what ultimately spawns a lot of our clipper systems and delivers them the vorticity or energy that a storm needs to really start to kick off. So these are the two primary factors, and they start to merge together right here before they ultimately do merge and will begin to make their way off into Greenland. So that's what they're discussing here. If we go further in on their discussion, let's see where we start off here. Still as the phasing takes place along with some degree of amplification, mid and upper level divergence, and rather strong vorticity advection will result in ample lift across the northern mid-Atlantic for much of the daytime hours on Friday. The left exit region of a rather strong jet streak passing to our south will enhance that lift. Despite the initial surface low tracking quickly offshore, pressure falls will occur back toward our region, with a combined low somewhere south of Cape Cod, while an inverted trough hangs back to the New Jersey coast through late Friday. So essentially what it's saying there is it's actually referencing a high-level theory that we have in meteorology called Quasigeostrophic Theory. And essentially what that does is we analyze jet streaks that occur in the upper parts of the atmosphere and kind of bisect them into different sections. So we have a jet streak that is currently forecast to be over the Midwest in this particular region. And what you do is you bisect it into two. So we'll excuse pivotal once again. One sec. Yep, there we go. So we bisect it into four parts actually. So if we look at it like this, we have four distinct regions. Now what they referenced was the left exit region. So this is the direction that the wind is coming, and this is the direction that the wind is going. I don't know if I can change my color at all. I think I can, actually. Yep. So if you can see this better. So this is the direction the wind is coming. This is the direction that the wind is going. They referenced the left exit region. Now, the left exit region is generally denoted as a region of strong ascent or lift. And as we know, that in order for any kind of convection to occur, convection in that of itself is just ascent. It is lift. So wherever in this jet streak we can get the strongest amount of lift is where we can expect some of the strongest amounts of precipitation. And we can see that referenced by this right here. So here we have our trough in, and then upward motion exists here. Downward motion will exist in the left entrance region. And in some respects, the right entrance region can be inverse to the left exit. So we see some upward motion if the trough was more of a geostrophic gradient. And we have the right exit region, which would typically give a little bit more downward motion. Now this is not tried and true. There are many different factors and many different exceptions that go to this rule, but quasi-geostrophic or QG theory is a very strong way that a lot of meteorologists forecast through kinematics. As as they go through their forecasting process. So this is what they go through. You don't hear a lot about QG theory when you listen to broadcasts, but ultimately this is what a lot of it is ultimately based off of. So it's kind of interesting, and all this is available for free. There's plenty of different ways for anyone to educate themselves about this kind of stuff. You can go and look up comment modules to be able to educate yourself at a collegiate level that is easy to understand. There's plenty of different ways. And honestly, just kind of reading this and then looking at free websites that you can do. All the websites that I've shown you are largely free. Just kind of teaching yourself. I mean, that's kind of how I got started, and ultimately, that's kind of what inspired me to want to be a meteorologist in the first place. So that's essentially what it's looking at. And another thing that we're going to see is snow totals. Now, this is what I've been generally using, the Icon model out of Germany. They are using a true snow to liquid ratio, so they're usually a little bit more accurate. In this particular model, I don't necessarily believe that it's going to be this low. Maybe we could take a look at some. I don't want to. You can see what the HER's thinking. Let's see. Accumulated snowfall, snow to liquid ratio. Okay. Give that a second to load. Yeah, I think it's the snow to liquid ratio that's throwing some of this off. But generally speaking, I mean, what the Icon and general convective models in general do with snowfall like this is they're good at developing a good floor, but they will never show the ceiling to a storm. So while I wouldn't look at this as like, oh, it's your if you live in northwest Philadelphia near Allentown, or you live in Sterling or Baltimore, Newark, whatever it might be, you're going to get a flat 2-3 inches maybe. I wouldn't say that. I'd say that that's a good baseline to start off with, and then it can go higher. But I would say these areas are definitely in for at least 1 to 2 inches of snow. And people always ask, well, it's like, okay, well, what's the best model to use, or not even model? Like, let's say grandma wants to know how she can get a good forecast and whatnot. She doesn't know what app to use. Well, honestly, the best thing to use, is to just hyperlink your local National Weather Service office to a button on your homepage of your phone. It'll be the fastest loading thing that you get, and it'll be the most accurate forecast with all kinds of different stuff that you could see that they put out. That'll be incredibly accurate most of the time. They're doing their best. So this is what the National Weather Service office in Sterling, Virginia, just east or west of D.C., is expecting for the region. Generally a trace to definitely less than 1 inch for the majority of the Virginia Piedmont. As you get up to the Virginia, Hagerstown, Frederick, Maryland border in general, you're going to get more into that 1 to 2 inch range. Farther to the coast on this side of the Chesapeake Bay, up into the Delaware River, you're going to experience a little bit more snowfall. But as far east as you go, you're going to be interacting with that coastal low, which we talked about before. That's going to be getting a lot of warm Gulf Stream air pumped into this. Ultimately, though, 2 to 3 inches in this particular region, and then if you go into the Alleghenies in West Virginia, that's where the higher altitudes will be getting a lot of moisture in and blocking a lot of moisture from the Great Lakes. And if you go a little bit further, this is kind of the bullseye where they're expecting Philadelphia, Allentown, Somerville, central New Jersey in general, 4 to 6 inches. Me particularly, a lot of the forecasters that I follow on Twitter that are much better at snowfall forecasting than I am, I don't particularly have a lot of experience doing snowfall forecasts, just because majority of my life I've lived in the Southeast, where that's not necessarily the most important thing in the world to know. But definitely people that live in the Northeast, it's very, very important to them. And it's some of the hardest forecasts to make in the country due to the rain-snow line. The rain-snow line isn't really much of an issue here. You can see they have it denoted by these white and purple lines right here. Usually it's kind of like right along the coast, and you don't know if Long Island or New York City and the Connecticut coastline, Hartford, are going to be able to get all the snow that they really want. In this case, I think it's pretty slam dunk that everyone's going to be getting snow for this particular one. But it will mainly come down to where the trough ultimately lines up and how much moisture return they can ultimately get. So you can see in this is a sounding from DC ultimately, or not DC. This is from Trenton, if I remember correctly. Yep. What you're looking for is you want the temperature and this is obviously a radiosonde sounding, so this is a profile cutout of what the atmosphere straight up, like if you took a big slice of the atmosphere, what it would look like, and how moist it would be, and how warm it would be, and what direction the winds are coming, and all that jazz. Essentially, you can see that they're largely mirrored, which is a way of showing, is a way of depicting saturation. So in that respect, I would expect there to be precipitation in this particular setup. And then also, this little line right here denotes the dendritic growth zone, which is the region of the atmosphere that is between negative 12 degrees Celsius and negative 17 degrees Celsius up in the atmosphere. And when enough moisture and convection occurs in that particular area of coldness in the atmosphere, that is where the biggest ice crystals end up forming, and snow can fall if it's unimpeded by any further dry air and any further dry air or warm temperatures as it falls through the earth. So you can see that we're well below freezing. The freezing line is denoted by this blue line here at 0 degrees Celsius, and we are well below that. So that's why this particular region is looking at, and it's quite a pretty big mixed layer. Moisture goes all the way up into the mid-levels, if not higher, of the atmosphere. So I assume this is why that the forecasters there in Mount Holly are predicting such a high amount of snow for this particular region. It just won't be entirely long-lived enough, as the forcing will start to push it out to sea by Saturday morning. So that's what we're looking at over the next few days in terms of snowfall. Just wanted to kind of try my hand at dissecting that just a little bit. But what's going to happen post this event? So we're looking at now at our low levels of the atmosphere, 850 millibar level. What is that? That's about a mile up in the atmosphere. And ultimately, you can see this is the generalized flow. This is today at 4 p.m. So we can see this is where we are getting most of our warmer, more mild air, as it's coming generally from the southwest, generally from the Gulf in this particular region of the U.S. But let's move it forward in increments of days. So we start to see that trough really start to pan out. You see it far south of Cape Cod, where it'll start to merge, and we'll get a good amount of, and you can see what direction is the wind ultimately coming from. Well, it's coming from the northwest, and the northwest is where all the cold air is. We believe if we went to temperature, we could see that cold air a little bit more easily. Yep, still moving in that general direction. Still in that general direction. So ultimately, that is kind of going to be the story over the next couple of days. And we sit underneath this big high pressure. Not a lot of wind. Once we get underneath of it, you can see where these winds are diverging at the surface is where that high pressure is centered. So this is Saturday night. I believe Saturday morning is going to be quite cold for us, so this does not account for wind chill. We're at 19 degrees in Charlotte, 17 in Atlanta. But ultimately, the high pressure starts to move further and further to the east. Now, what happens is that high pressure, if that's centered right here, I'll use orange this time. So if the high pressure center is right here, we know that high pressure moves in an anticyclonic fashion, which would be clockwise. So we go in this general direction for airflow, right? So we can see that, and it'll move outward from its center, because high pressure at the surface is diverging air. So if you see what that looks like, ultimately, you can see generally that air is starting to move from the south to the north. And on this side, we have the cold air still spilling off into the Atlantic. But this going into next week is going to be very important, because as this high pressure starts to move off of the coast, this channel starts to get stronger and stronger as it encounters the warm, moist air from the Gulf. And that's going to essentially what we like to call opening the Gulf, because it's essentially opening the floodgates. All the moisture and all the warmth starts to channel and chug its way in, and it can go as far north as Canada if it's strong enough. And that's ultimately what the models are trying to decide right now. How strong is that high pressure system going to be? Because that's not only going to dictate just how warm and how moist the atmosphere is, but also is going to depict or dictate how strong the next trough that comes our way mid to late week next week could bring some potentially severe weather. So let's take a look at what that moisture return is going to look like. This is taking a look at that moisture, and I'm going to have all these set out on about Thursday or Wednesday night. This one is. So Wednesday night, you can see plenty of moisture, plenty of green and blue to be seen throughout most of these models in the GFS, Euro, and the Icon. Moisture will not be an issue in this respect. Let's take a look at what our temperatures look like. We'll take a look at our let's take a look at our temperature anomaly. You can see plenty of warm air to be had all throughout. No cold here in a relative sense. No cold here, and you see that high pressure definitely denoted off into the southern tier of the Atlantic, of the North Atlantic, right at that particular moment. But if we have the moisture and we have the disparity in warm and cold air, what is ultimately going to be the driver of severe weather? That will be the vorticity. This is where we look for the energy ribbons, as they were. And when you see these grays and blacks right next to deep reds and purples, that denotes where there's quite a bit of energy in the atmosphere. So this is Tuesday at 0Z. Let's move it forward to Wednesday, 0Z. So it'll generally, this is what the models are trying to suss out right now. So we definitely have two general trough systems in place. We're going to have one that's going to be up here, and we're going to have one that's going to form in the panhandle, another panhandle low. But ultimately, we're going to see just if it forms here, I would generally expect this to be a weaker system. That is currently what the UK Met here is kind of deciding on. But if it forms down here, because if you form here as a panhandle low, it generally gets to the Ozarks, and then it encounters some kind of interference, and it'll start to move up to the Midwest, and us here in the Southeast are left high and dry. If it starts here, it's going to dip as far south as it can. It'll get down here, and the further south, and I'm talking in terms of like if you're looking for severe weather or even winter weather, here we won't have the cold air in this particular circumstance. So don't get excited about any kind of snow late next week. This will be mainly a severe threat if this comes to pass. But if the low starts here and it moves to South Texas, and the ridging starts really pushing high up here, and we get a huge, significant, and the air starts not to move, it stops moving geostrophically, and it starts moving meridionally, that's where we could really get some intense storm systems. So you can see in this the CFS, not particularly bullish. Euro, some stuff right there. You can see these little perturbations that show some Texarkana moisture and what or instability. GFS is interesting. GFS, I think, is probably the one we want to focus in on the most right now. GFS, in term, I can actually check real quick to see how the GFS is done. Actually, I can't do that at the moment. I don't have my bookmarks up. But the GFS, generally speaking, for itself has performed rather well recently. Not as well as the Euro, but it's always we have to respect the flagship models when they're about a week out. That's when they usually do their best anyway. So the GFS actually has the low forming over Arizona and New Mexico midweek next week. And if we want to just follow the GFS here, we can maybe see what it has in mind. We'll let it load just a little bit. Alrighty, there we go. So we see that geostrophic flow, that high pressure start to build in, very calm, stable weather. And then we see this is middle of the week next week. So latest run is not as bullish as the one previous. Okay, that's interesting. So that actually moves off relatively quickly, but look at what comes in behind this. This is That is interesting. So we get a little bit of a cutoff low that goes well deep into Mexico. This is Tuesday night. And wow, look at that. And then that kind of, as a cutoff low, it starts to kind of deliver these different waves. It's very indicative of a stormy pattern in the southeast. Typically, this kind of, and I'm seeing this live. I haven't actually looked at this. So this typically opens up the Gulf, right? The further east that this cutoff low centers dictates where the primary storm tracks are going to be. If it's further to the west, this will be mainly a Mississippi River Valley event. If it's further to the east, it'll affect us here in the southeast. And what that means generally as well is it'll dry out the majority of the Mountain West, which they're probably fine with. Honestly, that area, it likes getting snowfall because that is ultimately the main driver for agriculture and kind of just in general making sure that the rest of the Central Plains are well taken care of, along with flooding the Mississippi. But so they're probably fine with a little bit of a reprieve. It should open itself up to a little bit more mild temperatures as well. But ultimately, this pattern is a dry pattern for them. But for us, this kind of opens up a little bit more of a can of worms, because if that trough starts to intensify, look at this, we got meridional flow, perturbations throughout, and it just keeps on going. Now this is well out in the future. This is next weekend. I wouldn't give too much credence to this, and this is the GFS. It has performed a little bit worse than the Euro as of late. We can actually probably just for fun see what the Euro is thinking. We'll go forward in time. Euro doesn't even go out that far since it's now high res. Well, you can kind of see that it's actually thinking along the same lines. Not as severe. The trough is not completely cut off. It's just very, 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 very deep. And there's certainly potential for something definitely severe to come out of that. So we're definitely going to have to take a look at what this all looks like towards the latter half of next week. But ultimately, this is how the forecasts begin. You start putting the pieces together, piece by piece, and you ultimately create guidance every day in order to be able to kind of suss out, chances in that of itself. And the models help, but you can also have your kinematic theory like Quasigeostrophic Theory. You have analogs, what have systems done in the past under certain circumstances. There's tons of things that forecasters are in charge of making sure that they get the best forecast possible. It's not just reading a model or reading an app to tell them what it is. So, folks, that is exactly what we are expecting over the next 5, 7, maybe even 10 days. Really hope you enjoyed kind of giving this a little bit of a deep dive into it. Once again, my name is Zach for Great Atmosphere. I do videos like this every weekday. And essentially that's where the focus of my forecast will ultimately be, and any interesting weather that might happen around it, I'll be more than happy to kind of do my own, deep dives and explainers, just for fun. This is all just for fun for me. So I appreciate you tuning in. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and I will see you again tomorrow for another forecasting video. Bye now.